Welcome to the AMP Consent breakout session. My name is Micajuine, and I work on the analytics working group as part of AMP Consent. So today we're going to do a quick overview of what AMP Consent is. Then we're going to talk about some of the challenges that we've had in getting where we are today, as well as future work. And then finally, we'll open it up to everyone who wants to talk. Any questions, discussion topics, or feedback that you'd like to give us about what we've done so far and our future work, feel free to add them to the chat and we can address them afterwards. So I'm sure you've all sort of seen this sort of consent prompt before. As you can see here, when the GIF starts, the first image is blocked due to not having the consent of the user. And then once the user clicks accept or reject, then the image gets unblocked. So this is sort of the functionality that we give through AMP consent. The purpose of AMP consent was to provide the ability to collect and store users' consent, as well as to integrate with other components. This is especially important for publishers in order for them to stay compliant and to keep their monetization high while delivering a great user experience through AMP. Recently, as more and more regulations have been created surrounding user privacy and consent, it's important that AMP provides these functionalities to publishers in order to stay compliant. For AMP pages specifically, some reasons why this may be really important is to allow ad vendors to get the consent from the users in order to serve personalized or non-personalized ads for monetization purposes. To also block any third-party component based upon user consent, and also to collect consent through AMP Story. As a publisher, you can use AMP consent to determine if the user should be allowed to be asked if they should interact with the UI controls. Then you can also capture the user's consent decision through those. And finally, you can make the user settings available to elements on the AMP page and allow AMP to modify the page's behavior based on that consent given. Our vision when we created AMP consent was to give users control over their consents and privacy and allow publishers and ad vendors to be compliant with regulations such as GDPR. To accomplish these goals, we've had to tackle some unique problems. With the introduction of CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act, publishers now had the problem of handling multiple regulations, such as the GDPR we mentioned earlier, as well as now this new CCPA. We tackled this by creating the geo override configuration in the consent settings, which would allow you to configure your consent settings based upon the location given through AMP Geo. And we also created a new preset for the California area, similar to the preset we had to detect users in the EU regions. Looking forward, we, with more attention on data and privacy and new regulations that will inevitably pop up, some questions that we have might be, should we continue to add more of these sort of presets of locations? And should we continue to support these locations as well? Or should we delegate this task to some other party or give the responsibility to the publishers and CMPs? The next sort of issue we had to tackle here was that there are standardized frameworks for communicating consent between all parties, like publishers, CMPs, as well as the ad vendors. And our problem here was we needed to figure out how we were going to support this communication between these parties. Our solution was to make AMP consent able to help these parties by following the IAB TCF framework. And by doing this, we were facilitating the needs of the CMPs and publishers. We did this by not enforcing or validating the consent strings that were passed in, not using any of the APIs that were described in spec, and only passing this consent information to parties that were interested, such as the ad vendors, so that they could access this consent info. A lesson that we learned here was when we were trying to anticipate the needs of the publishers, something that was really helpful for us was to have lots of open discussions on GitHub, where we were able to see what the publishers needed and sort of base our requirements around things that they felt were imperative to their pages. The next thing that we tackled here was that we needed to store user consent client side for fast access. But this was challenging due to the fact that some browsers prevented us from setting third-party cookies or storing information in local storage from a cross-domain iframe. The solution here was to store the cache consent info in local storage by sending the consent that was captured in the AMP page to the AMP viewer that the page was being shown on, and using the viewer to store the consent info through the top level domain. However, there were some restrictions to this, which were just trade-offs. Since these pages that were served from the cache share the same top-level domain, that means that they also share the same local storage. So we had to limit the size of the consent info that was being stored by the publishers and CMPs. And this also relied on the fact that the CMPs working with the publishers had to agree upon the stored consent info format. Finally, another challenge we had was we needed to emphasize great UI and UX through AMP. However, sometimes this could be hard to balance with the need to generate high monetization for publishers on their pages. Our solution here was to provide a lot of great UI and UX features, but to also place some restrictions on them so that we could balance great user experience as well as high monetization. Some improvements that we've made in this sort of area and some features that we have are the new updating Lightbox UI for the consent dialogues, as well as better accessibility for screen readers that publishers can configure, better full screen capabilities for the consent dialogues and consent bottom panes, as well as offering different styling for these bottom pane consent dialogues, such as the different VHs. So what's next? With all this work that's been done to get us where we are today, there is still a lot of work left to do to continue to make AMP a great experience for users and developers. Some questions that we still have, we still like input on are what does the future look like for privacy and consent, and how can we get AMP there to support it? In particular, another question we have is, how will we handle granular consent in the future? Granular consent refers to the idea that users want to share want to be more specific in what data they share and what consent they give. So with these open questions, we look forward to having more discussions like this on GitHub with anyone who would like to contribute. And we always welcome outside input as well as anyone who wants to help adding to our repo. So now after that talk, we have here's some information on how to contact us. You can contact us on GitHub, by using our working groups. And you can also contact us via Slack at the working group analytics channel. So now I'd like to open it up to anyone who would like to discuss. Yeah.
To kick things off, can Yushwan tell us where she is on vacation right now?
In Hawaii. This is a picture I took in Hawaii back in January.
So it sounded like, Mika, you had some questions in mind that you wanted to discuss. Do you want to maybe loop back to those and kick off the discussion?
Sure. I guess if anyone, we could talk about the granular consent maybe, and how that is kind of collected outside of non-AMP world, or maybe how we would want to do that here in AMP world. If anyone has any thoughts on that.
I saw a lot of granular consent like UI, and then sometimes I try to customize it myself when I'm browsing the web, and then it's really just too complicated. And then eventually I would give up and say, okay, I'll accept all your terms if I really want to see the content, or I just leave the page. Yeah, anything you think that will maybe what's the future like? Because I feel like that's not good for publisher, nor like it's not good for like end users, right? Because I feel like when I leave that page, they lost the monetization, or they even lost the potential reader. But for me as well, that's like a super bad user experience when something pop up, and I really don't want to give all my data to all the default vendors. Right. Actually, I feel like since this should so the IAB TCF, it's definitely an attempt to standardize all this consent flow. Like, so I'll only give it once, and it should be applied to every single publisher out there, because I feel most of the cases, since the TCF string applies to ad vendors, it's the same for all publishers. But then I wonder if eventually there will be a solution that's like on the browser level, the browser would say, hey, we allow you to customize your consent setting, and it will be applied to every single page that you visit.
It seems unlikely that browsers are going to do this,
Okay.
just because then they would be storing privacy information about users, which they don't like to do.
Okay.
But some browser vendors have started storing privacy information in the reverse, what people don't like to do. However, it's not per user. It's aggregated across all sorts of different sessions, right? And then anonymized to create general rules that can apply to everyone's sessions. So I'm very curious. I don't think browsers are going to go in that direction, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
To me, actually, that would make a lot of sense. I mean, maybe not browsers, maybe even just operating system, even at a high level, and browser just API in it to it. Because you should think about this as just such a private information. that could survive backups and everything else, but also definitely not go anywhere. Because right now, every time we say let's do privacy a little better, somehow we always make it worse by giving a more centralized party access to all this data. I think it would be nice that operating system and browser by extension could play a better, a bigger role here.
Mm. So you may even like a level that's like below browser. It's more like a system setting that browser can retrieve from.
Possibly. I mean, browsers today store cookies. They don't understand them, but they do. I mean, they also store passwords and stuff. I mean, to me, at least, it's not like I mean, I understand where they would hesitate to do this, but also from regulatory point of view, just saying, hey, let's, take a few major platforms and, operating systems plus browsers, and can we work out something that every site can plug in and just basically ask, am I okay doing this, and get an answer with consent of a user without necessarily understanding how that's stored and propagate it and so on. Just, think about this, all the geographic rules, right? Now every site has to actually, before most sites didn't care unless you were personalizing something. But now every site actually has to know where you're coming from.
That's true.
Like, what if it was just like a site saying, am I simply in a CCPA regulatory zone? Or am I in a GP, whatever, T, or GP, whatever. There's so many abbreviations to this point. But, just even asking that by itself is already seems like less effort. And also, platforms could play better with some sort of a consent that's not intrusive. I mean, right now it just pops up everywhere. You have no idea what you're actually consenting to. I don't know. To be honest, like I agree that this doesn't seem like that much of an improvement in the previous state.
True. Because I saw a question from Pete.
Yeah, to answer your question, Pete, we're going to prioritize this work coming up in Q3. And we'd like to start a discussion around this sort of topic with CMPs and publishers. So there have been some GitHub issues open on about this. And so, yeah, we just like to get more input and sort of figure out what you guys need on your ends, and then we can help make that possible through AMP.